be educated in order to be useful. And I think that our speakers today will help me prove that point and help me see at all the other directions that we can be useful to the environment, ourselves, and eventually the community as a whole. So I'd like to welcome Joke Cornelis from Vites. If I don't pronounce something right, just correct me, right?
Okay, yes, no problem.
All right. So Sorën Lex from Plasticpreneur. Hi, Sorën. Peter Sarloos, right? Okay, from Benedict Peax. And David Katz, who will be joining us in a few minutes. So starting off with Joke. Joke is I've got my notes here, is a quality process optimization and innovation engineer at Vites. And Vites is a socioeconomic organization active in employment opportunities and poverty alleviation. And they manage that by building sustainable goods and services and in essence, educating people, bringing forth awareness, training people, and everything that comes with getting everybody involved in solving adapting to climate change, solving community problems, and moving on to the wider national spectrum. So, Joke, the floor is yours.
Okay, I will present my presentation. Okay. You can see it? Okay. So, good afternoon, everybody. I will tell you something about our organization, Vites, and the test case that we did with the Stad Leuven, Govaplast, and Ecowerf. I will tell something more about the activities, the employees, and the finance of Vites, and afterwards I will enter a little bit more about the test case of plastics we did. First of all, like Nicolas already mentioned, we are a social organization, sustainable business. The social aspect is found in the employment of the people with the major difficulty accessing the labor market and the fight against poverty. The sustainability aspect is reflected in the activities themselves, mostly reuse and also recycle, and the choices we made in the managing of the business. We are a single community of interest. It means we are different groups and we work together since 2016. We are Spits, Televille and Nivaville, and we work in the province of Flemish Brabant, but excluding Haarland, and we also work in Brussels. The main activities, we organize reuse activities for our sustainable thrift shops. We collect reusable goods, we are sorting them, we are cleaning them, we are testing them and repairing them. And then afterwards we will sell them at appropriated socially inclusive prices in our shops. We collect a lot of goods. In 2020, we collect about more than 9,000 tons of goods. And in the different categories, it's normally furniture, textiles and electronics are the most biggest parts, but also books, household, and other things. All the products we collect, we process them. So we've got a lot of reuse. We've got, yeah, I can't see it now, but we have 54% of reuse. Excuse me. Yes, it's just I can't see this in my presentation, but the reuse is 34%, recycling is 54%, waste is 7%, and process is 4%. We sold them at the different shops we have. That's about 3,000 tons. what means almost 2,007,000 items. Every day we've got about 2,100 clients that come to buy the reused goods. The employments, our employees, we work about with more than 700 employees, women and men. The people of all ages, and we have 62 different countries of origin in our social organization. All people with a lot of different religious and outlooks of lives. The target group in our organization are all people that permanently alienated from the open labor markets, that are people with medical, psychological, or other social problems, and they can enter in the company after an ECF screening. And ECF is National Classification of Functionation. But a part of the group of the target group, we give also employment to another group, a lot of other people. Other groups are the labor care, that are people that just can start work a few days in a week. People with an integration income, also students for part-time learning, alternative sanctions, and also we have a lot of people from projects like language immersion projects, but also we work together with the people in the prisons. The finance, 50% is subsidized by the government, but 60% is our own incomes from sales and services. And for us, it's very important that every euro is spent with care, and almost of the part is just for creating jobs and organize the training. So I'll give a little explication about Vitesse, because we are not a common organization. But now I will explain a little bit more about the test case of plastic that we did together. For us, it was very important to do this experience, because we always are looking for new opportunities for adapted work to the target group, because the target group can't enter as such in the company, but we noticed that the target group is weakness, and also the people are less skilled. So we have to really look for adapted work for the people, so they can have work anyway. But also in terms of the environment, it's very important, because one of our objectives is always also reducing the waste mountains. And also we are finding to try to find opportunities to sort out waste into recyclable fractions. This pilot project, we didn't do it alone, but we did it with different partners. The Stad Leuven at first, because they give the financiation for the project. Then Govaplast, that is a company that produced products from recycled plastics. And also Ecowerf, that is the intermunicipal waste processor in Leuven. The objectives of this project were different. First of all, can the target group of employees of Vitesse, can they sort out the correct hard plastics? Then the hard plastics that they sorted out, can it be processed into new circular products? And can the new businesses be developed for the various partners? And also, can we stimulate and facilitate cooperation between the regular companies and the social economy organizations? It's like a good practice. Then we start the project, first of all, with the preparatory phase. It was to get more knowledge about the different types of plastics and about separation techniques, because we don't have the experience itself. So for us, it was a new thing that we had to explode. And we did it by research, by consulting experts, also by following some workshops and by experimenting with the neo scanner. It's a near infrared. With this information, we start to design a didactic material so that the target group can use it. We make a flow so that it was more easy to recognize the different plastic flows. And also we make a photo panel with the commonly used plastics products. So it was visual, very strong material. But also in the workshops, we give also workshops to the target groups so that they can make the difference between the different plastics. Then the experience itself, it took place at the EcoWerf sites. There in that site, employees of Vitesse have sorted out different hard plastics, the LDPE, the HDPE, and the PP. That was the project focus, but afterwards they asked also to sort out some additional types of plastics. So it was fridge boxes, polycarbonate, segregated sheets, flexible pipes, and rigid pipes. The plastic that was sorted was transferred to an installation where the plastic was broken, ground and washed. And that clean and ground plastic was processed to the third partner, Hoaplast, for the final processing and making recyclable products. The other elements that we sorted out, they were not elaborated in this pilot phase. But the result of the project, the product that Hoaplast made was a garden bench. That's now in Leuven, and yes, I can tell you, you can sit and relax on it, and you will sit on your waste here. It was a project, a pilot project, so it was just also to learn about it. And in the preparatory phase, what we learned about it, it's that the target group, they are perfectly capable of determining the right fractions of the basic of the plastic based on the photos and instructions. It was gone well, that work. And also the scanner that we used for the near detection, it was useful for the detection, but we needed to have the database for, yes, and also development, the specific software to be linked to the database. And also the detection is only giving some curves, but it has to make more use-friendly. During the sorting phase, it was, like you see on the photo, it was not so easy to work on the site, on the seat of EcoWerf, because there was a lot of other noises, but also the weather condition. As if we have to do that work more than it needs to be in a sheltered environment. The working itself, it was, yeah, physically, it's very hard work. So we need strong employees for doing this work outdoor. But also now we just take out different plastics, but at the level of ergonomic, it was not so good. It's really a bottleneck. The plates in themselves are not so heavy, but the work itself to take out the different sorts of plastics, that's heavy work. So yes, we have to look how can we automatize this kind of work so that it can be more ergonomic. The processing itself, the fractions that they sorted out, they were good or they were satisfactory for further processing. That was okay, but there were some little amounts of metal that was still remaining in the mix. So in the phase of processing, they needed the stronger magnets to take out all the metals. Then also for us, it was not easy to find a company to wash and grind the plastics because demand exceeds capacity by far. And maybe that's also something we have to look for. Maybe it's necessary to grind or wash installation in the region. That was just a pilot project. There are a lot of things that we have to explode in the market to go on with this, but it seems that it can be a very beautiful project in the future. So that was the little presentation.
Thank you, Jürgen. I mean, I've noted down some figures from what you said, and I understand social enterprise is a business model that is in need of support, especially in the first steps. Probably the more you grow, the more support might be needed, unless you find something that actually creates the profit, the revenues that are needed. So you said that you are employing 700 people, right?
Yes.
Right, so that's amazing on its own, especially working with basically second-hand products and sorting out second-hand products and all that. So from your experience on what you did right now with plastics and of course your experience with all the other second-hand material that you're using right now, could there be a better revenue opportunity for Vetis working towards that field? Or are there still too many, let's say, bottlenecks as you described in order to get to that stage? Have you worked out the economics of the whole process?
No, it was just yes, just a pilot project. So we just wanted to test out if it if there exists some possibility that the people can do it, because it's our people normally work inside and it's another kind of work they do. So that was the first challenge we made. Economic, we didn't, or almost maybe the partners did make the economics of it, but we as an organization, we didn't do that at this moment.
Okay, so are you thinking of extending the pilot towards this direction?
If it's possible, we will upgrade this experience. Yes.
Okay, thank you very much. So we'll talk more over the discussion, the roundtable. So I'd like to welcome now Sorën, Lex. Sorën is the co-founder and CEO of Plasticpreneur, as well as other impact-driven initiatives. With his team, they're working on Plasticpreneur hubs, and basically what they're doing is building plastic recycling equipment combined with social entrepreneurship programs to make plastic circular. And I must say that I've watched videos and before we had our first contact with Sorën, I watched videos of their activities in Europe and outside of it, and I was very impressed. It takes a lot of vision and empathy to be able to drop things and just go somewhere and help people and build something for them to work better. And Sorën, the floor is yours to tell us more about it.
Thank you. Hello from my side as well. Let me try to share my screen. Well, that's my family. Here we are. Yeah, my name is Sorën. We are based in Austria, in the south of Austria, close to Italy and Slovenia. And we are basically trying to develop solutions to make plastic circular, which also fits the making it circular challenge here. And it was quite interesting because the things Yoki said, there's a lot of synergies of things we are trying or we see or saw ourselves. So if you go back to the story and why everything started, basically plastic is a perfect material for the circular economy. It's durable, light, easy to process, cost efficient to manufacture, and compared to many other materials, it saves a lot of CO2 emissions in the process and so on and so forth. So basically we say plastic is a perfect material, although the media and many other places tell us plastic is very bad and should be diminished basically. So if it's such a perfect material for the circular economy, why is it then not used much more in the circular economy? So our main finding is that this is mainly due to the lack of access to basic recycling technologies and know-how. Some things we just heard from Vites and their activities. And because there is the lack of this access, it is not reused or used and ends up often in the environment. As you can see here, a picture from a project in Uganda we started a couple of years ago. So if we look at the history, then the interesting part is that compared to other materials such as paper or glass with hundreds or even thousands of years of history and recycling history, even in the old Egypt, they recycled the papyrus. Plastic is quite young. It was established on a broader scale just in the middle of the 20th century and basically skipped the era of establishing a hands-on craftsmanship and started right on the industrial level with huge industry, machines, cost-efficient machine parks. And the whole recycling setup is even younger and just started half a century ago. We all know from our experiences, wooden workshops, steel workshops, even glass workshops, how to transform the material into new products. But we all know plastic, the material, but we don't really know how this material can be transformed into something else. Something which is usually very common with all the other materials which are around us, but plastic, this material which is everywhere, we don't really know how to transform this or how to take this as a craftsmanship and turn into new objects. And that's basically what's interesting, because it's not so hard, the whole process. All you need to do is things we just heard from Yoki, the waste collection, collecting the waste, washing and sorting it, shredding it, heating it as a thermoplast, and inject it under pressure into the new products you want to have. So actually a quite simple process, but the access to many of these steps is very limited or very hard to reach. Not only here, not only in decentralized places in Africa or other countries where we are active, but also right in the middle here in Europe, as we just heard from Yoki. So we are trying to, or not only trying, but we are creating solutions and access to explore and experience this whole process, to design and create new products, to even serious manufacture whole product batches of thousands of units. And the summary of all of this, enable new business and skill development opportunities. That all is done with some of our machines we can see here on the picture. Those are simple plastic recycling machines which started in the open source communities. We then redeveloped over the last couple of years and brought to a professional, certified, safety standards fulfilling setup. They're easy to use, easy to ship around the world, low cost compared to actual industrial machines, but bring everything necessary to make plastic circular. Next to the machines, of course, you need the molds where you then can inject the melted or the hot plastic into. And depending on the project, you can see here an example how it is done. You have again the waste collection. Then you somehow need to get the granules through shredding it. Then you have the next machine, the injection machine or the extruder, and the molds, and you have your finished product. And since the product is actually the most important thing, because without the product, without knowing what you actually want to produce, you don't need the technology or the machines. The trainings and programs in human-centered design, product development, market research, and so on and so forth is in our eyes often much more important than having the right machines on the ground or on the place. And that's basically what we are trying to do. We are trying to create this access, like I mentioned, to these different targets, project groups, organizations, customers, whatever. What has happened in the last almost 2 years now is that we have shipped more than 200 machines to more than 55 countries with hundreds of molds, meaning in every fourth country of the world we are active in the one or the other project, which shows us, because mainly it's still in Europe, which shows us that this access to this craftsmanship or this ability to transform plastic waste into new products is lacking everywhere. So everybody or everywhere people are looking exactly for these processes. And now we will see some cases how more in the explorational phase, where for the organizations it's more important to have access to the circular economy stages. It's used in workshops, educational programs, in hands-on workshops, exhibitions, demonstrations by universities, by brands, science centers, even maker spaces, fab labs, and so on and so forth. That's an interesting case from Norway, where actually this boat is traveling on the fjords, and on the boat they can print a keychain of the boat out of waste they're collecting there. We are partnering together with universities, with students, where it's more about creating new products, prototyping, testing new products with brands together, developing more circular products, because also the whole process of actually turning a product or actually creating a product made out of plastic, not only plastic waste, but plastic in general, is quite expensive, because mold making is a very expensive and complex work. Then having this huge machine. And so a lot of products or even spare parts for products don't hit the market because the costs of actually deploying these products are too high. But now if we come and say, well, you can basically very cheaply prototype and even batch manufacture the first couple of thousands of these units, suddenly new products in a circular design and recycled plastic can hit the market. Yeah, these are just some examples. Very famous, one of our customers is Recom from the United Kingdom, who have been a couple of times in the Vogue magazine with their comps and so on. And the interesting thing is that often they are connected to organizations like Vites, where basically the people who are producing those products belong to kind of a social enterprise scenario. One of our most successful products, with numbers which are not correct, I see on the slide, are the face shields. Once COVID hit us beginning of last year, in Austria, we also faced a short pause on personal protective equipment. And then the 3D printing community started printing these face shields. And we realized that we can print them or inject them much, much faster, and can inject hundreds of these things per day. And felt that if in Austria, with maybe one of the best healthcare systems in the world, is lacking access to these things, then in many other countries, it will be the same. So we deployed in more than 10 countries these face shield production kits. And in the meantime, more than 200,000 face shields have been produced, which created more than 120 income opportunities during a global crisis. Yeah, and protect frontline workers. And still today in Afghanistan, up to recently, but in Kenya, in Uganda, still thousands of face shields are being produced every week and every month. And this showed us that once you have the right product, and it's a scalable product, you can basically scale it everywhere, because people just need the machines, and then we can ship the molds, or they locally produce the molds. Here's another customer from Trondheim who is more specialized on interior design, and doing flower pots, pegs, doorknobs, hooks, and so on and so forth. Or brothers make with a bench. We just saw a picture of a bench in the presentation before. These guys, also from the UK, they made a bench, or are making benches out of these face masks. So here again, we have a connection to the PPE, this thrown away one way or a couple of times used only face masks, which are made out of PP, the plastic PP, can be melted and then transformed into new objects. And in this case, they made a bench out of these face masks. So it's possible to sit on your waist, as we heard in the last presentation, and to even create those products with our simple technology. They're not only creating benches, but also here we can see bicycle wagons, and I don't know what else those guys are doing. And the thing which sums up everything for us, and the reason why we even started everything, was that we felt that Of course, it's great. We can create new products. We can make plastic circular, but at the end, we are taking this technology, these products, these services to really try to empower people, to give people tools in their hands that they're able to have skill development, income opportunities, learn social entrepreneurship skills, and so on and so forth. And those are the first two guys, Benj and Steven in Uganda, which everything started with them. And these things scaled to multiple countries now. We will see now if that's even possible. I don't know if you see the video. I hope that works. I don't know if you hear the sound or not, but it doesn't matter.
We can go on. I'll let you know.
Perfect. It's just a 1 minute video where we can see the Kakuma refugee camp, where we just spontaneously last December flew into. A colleague of mine set up a space there, and there is a group of people generating income now with the products they are producing there. And this also shows how simple it is. It just flew there with the machines in the backpack, basically, in a very, very remote area. Yeah. Yeah, and here we could see how simple it is. You arrive, set up the machine, you can start and basically turn plastic waste into new projects, new products. And what makes the most fun maybe for us is that it doesn't matter if it's BMW using them at the IAA, the largest automotive fair 2 weeks ago, or if it's a refugee camp setting, people everywhere are using them and enjoying basically this process of plastic recycling. But we don't want to look at it again. Yeah, we won a couple of awards from the UNIDO and the European Commission the last year, but that's all not important. Much more important is that together, even with organizations like Vites and the others we will hear, we're all trying to take a material or business models which are out there and make use of it and try the best for not only the environment, but in our case also especially for the people who are dealing with our products. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Sarah, for your presentation. I must say that we had a workshop in the municipality of Thessaloniki, and Plasticpreneur presented. They had the traditional presentation of showcasing what they can do, but what they did, and that I'm going back to what you said, explore and experience, right? What they did during this Zoom meeting and after the presentation is that they moved around with the camera. They actually created recycled products on the fly, and this has basically sparked a conversation between makers in the city, because we have in our mind the refugee part that you said with the refugee camp. We have a refugee camp here in outside of Thessaloniki, but it also sparked a very interesting discussion in creativity. You know, the things you can produce out of that. It is indeed something that it's in our everyday life. We see it every day, but then again, it's so exotic because as you, as you mentioned before, it's something that we don't know what to do with it. So there's a lot of discussion going on. We're happy to be working with Plasticpreneur, although the bureaucracy of Greece has not been kind to them, but we're excited to be expecting the equipment. So thank you, Sorën, for your presentation. Now we can go to Peter. Peter is a strategic funding consultant at Benedict Peax, right? Is it Pax? Is it Pax?
My unmute button didn't work. Peax, actually, Peax.
Peax, all right. And the good thing with Peter, the interesting thing is that basically he studied philosophy, and he went from that field to helping social enterprises or businesses make a better strategy, lead them to investment readiness, and help them in that aspect. And some of the activities that and the companies and the efforts that you have supported are in the circular economy field, as far as I understand. So, Peter, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Let me see if the screen sharing thing works. Mac and Microsoft are not friends. You see my screen?
Yep.
Okay, excellent. Yes, thanks for the introduction. I did indeed study philosophy. That doesn't have anything to do with what I'll be talking about today. Yeah, my message is a bit more sober, I'm afraid, than the previous two speakers, which was very inspiring. But it's about funding, and particularly our vision, Benedict Peax's vision on funding, which is strategic funding. Benedict Peax operates with the philosophy that funding and strategy are two sides of the same coin, which is to say that if you have a clear idea of what your strategy is, it's easier to get funding. Yeah, what we do is we sit down with startups or any technology company really, and we help them decide their strategic roadmap and find out what the next milestones are on that roadmap and acquire funding. And if we succeed, we take a portion, so it's results based. Yeah, I could go into a lot of background here. I'm almost trying to parse what I should get into, but I suppose time is limited. What I want to talk about, what I hope you get away from, is a bit of a richer model as to how to evaluate where you are now and how you could determine your own roadmap for the steps ahead, the funding rounds ahead. That will help you communicate with not just investors, but really it is our view that it helps you with any funding agency, be it public funding or private funding, and perhaps also get a clear picture of where you are now going ahead. Now, I do have some caveats, which is, we're not a huge company, and we operate in the Netherlands, so we are aware of some European grants. And there's some caveats to place there as well. I'll get into that later. But we're mostly aware of the Dutch landscape. We work mostly with generic subsidies. I was personally involved recently in a project for a specific grant, Dutch grant for recycling. But if you're not Dutch, that's not going to help you. So, keep that in mind. You might want to either look for someone who can help you in wherever you are nationally, or look yourself for local opportunities in that sense. But let's dive in now. I'm going to start with a model, and this model is supposed to help you, define your strategic roadmap. So, a company develops in several phases, and I think it's relevant to distinguish at least four. The first is the sort of ideation phase, which is, you're doing your research, your theoretical work, et cetera, getting all your results in order from what you can actually do from your desk, and that at some point leads to a sort of maximum of saturation. You've done everything you could from behind your desk, and you've validated the working principle of your technology, and that could be considered a proof of principle. Some people at that stage have a patent or have a patent from a university, for example, and now they're ready to go and try to test this on the market. Now, the next step then is to make a prototype of your technology and really test it in operational environment, not necessarily commercially yet, though. And this is considered, or this is what we call at least, a proof of concept. Defined here as a minimum viable product in operational environment. The next step is to move towards a product, right? So you have your first actual product, and you have, it appears that you can buy this at reasonable cost price and sell it at a higher asking price or whatever, have an operational pilot facility that produces, a recycled plastic, whatever it is that's going to make you benefit, going to make your profit. And the next step would be to actually scale into commercial maturity. So this might sound reasonable enough. NASA actually has this scale called TRL, which I'm sure many of you are familiar with. Feels to me a bit unnecessarily granular at times. What's the difference between TRL 7 and 8 and stuff? I think these four phases are more helpful. But at least if you're aware of this model, you can sort of lay it besides mine here and see, this is what I came up with, TRL simulated validation, lab scale validation. This is a philosopher making categorical distinctions. But I think that you probably are somewhere in the start right now. But I'm not sure. Obviously the previous speakers were somewhere else. It also depends on what you do. This is also sort of narrow on technology development, of course. But if you develop technology, you might be somewhere at the start. And then yeah. So what this TRL thing suggests, or seems to suggest it as, is that everything's about technological maturity, whereas there's more going on within your company. And the model that we came up with tries to describe all those things. And what's neat is that the layers that we came up with actually build upon each other. So you have your marketing and sales within your company, which is a layer, sort of the external layer. But you only have marketing and sales if you have a product or service to offer. And you can only offer your product and service if you have the underlying technology ready. And you can only have your technology if you have your team, staff, and competences. And you can only have your team, your staff, if you have the finances to pay them, or the sort of partnerships, it might be your co-founder at an early stage, etc. Right, so that's sort of the y-axis, and it's the dashboard of a company. You could think that all these things matter to a company at any point in time. And then this is sort of the t-axis, right? You develop in these stages towards commercial maturity. Now, you're never neatly going to develop in these areas. So what we typically see, we work with a lot of tech startups that are affiliated with the university, particularly Delft. And we see that they typically have a lot of, they're quite mature in their technology, but they have a lot of marketing traction to gather, and, have to speak to multiple customers still to validate that their idea actually, that there's actually interest on the market for their idea. Currently working with a startup that also has a pretty cool sustainable proposition, but she's working alone still. And, it really helps if you have a partnership, especially if you want to acquire funding. Otherwise, if you happen to fall ill for 2 weeks, your company's non-operational. So that's sort of the way you move towards a maturity, at least in the early stages. Now, each of these phases that I've described, they cost, well, at least an order of magnitude as much as the previous one. Now, they don't have to cost exactly that, of course, but you could think that Axis 2, for example, you get 20K, 200K, 2 million, 20 million for each of these phases. Research you can sort of do in your own time, but it would be great if you get a couple of tens of thousands to pay yourself a salary in the meantime. Then you really have to make this investment. It's going to cost you 200K, 300K, maybe even more. If you have to make a pilot plant or something, could go into the millions. So it varies per technology. Then there's a Series A investor that starts to make your first products, and a Series B investor to start scaling what you've built so far. It can be quite expensive. Now, the phase that starts at the end of research and ends at the start of revenue is known as the Valley of Death. Maybe you've heard of that term, but it makes sense because investors are willing to step in with their private money when you have revenue, because then they see some revenue and they think, with my money you can make that a lot of revenue. Let's do it. And up until here, you could have been funded by universities or whatever, but here you're still proving your technology, but you do have to make real investments. So this is a very difficult phase for startups, where you see a lot of startups fail. So what a lot of startups will do in this phase is they'll start looking for private investment, for private equity. And what you see is that, if you somehow succeed at making your pitch and patent worth $1 million to an investor, that a 300K investor from an angel investor, 300K investment from an angel investor, for example, might cost you 30% of your company, which will be a great investment for the angel if you, with that money, manage to raise the valuation to say 7 million. You can see here a multiple of 7. So the investor did a great job, but you have an investor on your balance sheet now for the rest of your company. So you dilute early. Now, this is just not necessary typically, and frankly impossible usually. It's very difficult to find anyone who's willing to make that investment in the first place. But there's fortunately all these alternative funds. Now, what I'm showing here is mostly, again, the Dutch landscape, but here below we have just alternatives to private sources, right? So we have in the Netherlands, we have an MIT feasibility, but it could be any feasibility grant that you can get for the early phases. Then from that point on, you can get POC loans that help you fund the POC. Now, they're called loans because you do have to pay them back, but for many of them, that's only if you are actually successful. So it's practically a subsidy. If your company succeeds, you have to refund, sure, but if it doesn't succeed, the risk is with the state. You're not personally liable. So that's something to keep in mind when you hear POC loan. You might think, I don't want a loan, it's too risky, but it's actually a pretty risk-free loan. Yeah, we have in the Netherlands we have tax incentives, but let's not go into that. We have leverages on investments, and there's of course the European grants. Now we have worked with European grants sometimes successfully, but the problem with European grants is, as great as they look, you cannot build a company or a funding roadmap on a lottery. Right, so if your odds are 30%, then you cannot say, okay, I'll just get that grant and then scale. It doesn't work, and it's even worse with something like the EIC accelerator, where it's less than 5% success rate. You can't build a company on that. It's just a nice bonus to have. So that's always something to keep in mind with European grants. As great as they look, they can be a bit deceptive, and then there's a huge opportunity cost. I'm personally especially critical of the EIC accelerator because it seems to me like a consultant's prize. Entrepreneurs shouldn't have time to do it, and it's a huge opportunity cost. It's just, I don't know what they're thinking with that thing. But anyway, if you manage to find a more healthy balance between these things, you'll see that here you didn't even have to dilute in this first phase. You managed to raise your company to a 7 million valuation, and you can maybe leverage in an investment and actually get 2.2 million, for example, and you raised a lot more. This is typically sort of let's call it a sales pitch, but I think it's with the company that I worked with recently, for example, it's also just, if you want to get private funding, you're going to need to validate some things, and that validation is usually done through subsidies. If you're doing something with sustainability, if you're doing plastic recycling, there are options in terms of subsidies and grants that I think you really should be looking at. And they're mostly going to be local. Well, yeah, so our method is to help you define a strategic roadmap, to find the best funding sources, and they are those with the highest success rate that prevent unnecessary dilution. So a couple of things here is that the high success rate, again, it really helps. So what we try to do is get startups loans that will fund that first phase. I've worked for this company for 3.5 years now, worked on, various things, but among them 8 POC loans of 350K. And, that's the kind of impulse that starts a company from ideation to building an actual company. And I think that's really what you should be looking for at this phase. So if you're, unsure of what the next step is, that's, I think, what you should be working for. If you recognize yourself as someone who is, at the ideation phase and sort of looking at the next step. Prevent unnecessary dilution. A remark there is always, and I do always want to add, it's not always bad to dilute. If you can attract an investor that, has a lot of strategic value to you, or that wants to, actually invest time as well, it can be a great idea to have an investor. Only you can make that judgment. But don't pursue private equity as though it is the only option. Would be something to take away here. Now I can show this final image of the landscape, but again it's a bit Dutch centric. So maybe it'd be better to get into what each of the startups themselves have already done so far, etc. And finally, I suppose this is the roadmap where you can sort of decide, what is the end goal that you have in mind? Where are you now on each of the layers of the model, and what is your next proof point? And that may help you decide what you think the next right step for funding is. Yes, thank you. You can always contact me, of course, but I think we still have a session to go here, so I'll leave it at that.
Okay, thank you, Peter. To be honest, I can totally relate with your presentation. I've founded my own startups, and I've coached startups. I've done investment readiness. I've helped startups get grants and things like that. In Greece, things are just a little bit different than the Netherlands. There's a very distinct gap in the very early stages. So a lot of good ideas don't even get off the ground. But things are changing. So I would like to, from your experience, how do circular economy startups stack up against more traditional, or I'm not even going to ask for ICT-based business models, but more traditional businesses? Your experience.
Yeah, it's a good question. So I've worked with some of them. We have a very specific program for sustainability startups called DEI here, Demonstration Energy Innovations, and it's a grant. So in that sense, you have an advantage, in fact, because you can get a grant rather than a POC loan to do a pilot. So if you have something like that locally, look it up and go for it, and look for someone who's experienced with it, like we are in the Netherlands. Because you might pay them a little bit, but they're going to help you get it right. So it's a good idea. I mean, everyone's happy when the money's in. Don't preferably get one that works results based, because they should be confident enough to make the investment themselves, I think. But yeah, in that sense, they have an advantage here. But they could also follow the regular track of a POC loan if they wanted to. But the startup that I worked with recently, he had a cool technology, new method to recycle ABS HIPs and soft PVC. He works with Shinetsu and stuff, but he said, so it's a really good proposition in my opinion, but he said the POC loan is just too small. If I want to make a pilot plant of 1.5 million, what is 350K going to do for me? So that is a concern here. So in that sense, you have to always sort of think about, okay, if the ticket size is going to be bigger, find someone who can also help you navigate the landscape. Where is money for your idea?
Right, that's an interesting thing. Circular economy, especially plastics, unless we're talking about producing something with recycled plastic, if you're going for processes, it can become very capital intensive very fast. So that's always a thing to consider. Thank you, Peter, for your presentation. So our next guest is David Katz, and I think we have taken some of your sleep because it's very early in Canada, as far as I understand right now.
No, it's not too bad. Thank you very much, and good morning. Morning from Vancouver.
Good morning. So David is the founder and CEO at Plastic Bank. He's a man of many awards, among which is the United Nations Lighthouse Award for Planetary Health. And as a CEO of Plastic Bank is a for-profit social enterprise, funded and based in Vancouver, Canada, and it addresses the serious issue of ocean plastic. And ocean plastic is not an easy issue to solve. It's not in our communities. It's not down the road. It's just somewhere out there, and it needs very, very different resources and different way of thinking, systematic thinking, and so on. So, David, the floor is yours.
Oh, thank you very much. I kind of want to resonate in that previous question as well that you had for that panelist about the difficulty, and is there a challenge between, the difference between, circular economy models and traditional business models, but we'll get to that.
Yeah.
So the Plastic Bank. So certainly, I'll give context to everyone. The Plastic Bank is a global marketplace for the developing world, not just the developing, but predominantly. Think of us more as a chain of stores, giant chain of stores for the poor, where everything in the store can be purchased using plastic garbage. School tuition, medical insurance, Wi-Fi, cooking fuel, water filtration, pharmaceutical, food supplementation, everything the world's poor truly need but couldn't afford, using garbage that would otherwise have flown into the environment or the ocean. as money. We've created a monetary standard out of the very debris that would otherwise be ending up in the bellies of birds, marine life. Inside of it all is a blockchain-based banking application, or really kind of a fintech, that allows our tens and tens of thousands of collectors to be able to transact that plastic-like money. It's financial inclusion. It gives not just a bank account, savings, an asset, but the more frequently you collect and return the material over time, you earn credit worthiness scores. So you have the ability to immediately borrow, immediately buy other financial products. You ascend this trap of namelessness by being able to substantiate who you are in the world. We've collected billions of bottles, billions, of course, all other things, but I use bottles as a metaphor. And we return that into the circular economy. Our customers include SC Johnson, Henkel, Hugo Boss, Gillette, Coca-Cola, and so many others that use that material as a feedstock into their packaging to truly connect with the regeneration economy. An opportunity for the world to participate. Buy something that is packaged with social plastic, and you are in fact working with the world's poor hand in hand to collect material from ocean-bound waterways and to help end some level of suffering as well. It's a very high level of what we do. We're doing very well. We're a for-profit business. Next year we'll do north of 100 million in revenue, and we are just beginning. Yeah, it's been in our 9th year, but we are just beginning. Yes, did it take time? Yes, did it take the rest of the world a moment to catch up to, this knowing that business for good is just business? Did we have to prove ourselves in the world? Yes. Could people believe in themselves what we were doing before they would participate? That was a big part of the challenge. They couldn't see for themselves how a company could go out and build a supply chain, connecting with the world's poor, working in some of the most disadvantaged, illiterate, violent communities in the world, returning that material consistently, building the digital infrastructure, all those things in their own mind. They couldn't believe it occurring in themselves, so they couldn't believe it in me. Part of the challenge. The beauty and gift of what we do in this conscious capital opportunity is it truly is an abundant mindset. I've always been an entrepreneur. Many of the businesses I've had in the past, I reflect now and say, I had a scarcity mindset. I felt that I had competition. I felt that I had competitors that were going to take from me. I felt that I had to go and get what was mine. I felt that competition would deteriorate. I felt that my sense of salvation in the future would be threatened. But I have a completely different paradigm today. This place where every single transaction, every time a collector returns material, everybody, everything wins. Every time we transact material to a large customer, everything, everybody wins. Every time a consumer buys a product with social plastic in it, everything, everybody wins. It's win, 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 win. Even the plastic wins, it becomes new again. We're powerfully entering the regeneration economy. We look at the Greta movement, tens of millions of children marching through the streets that weren't only facing climate change, but also survived an economic depression ocean acidification, marine debris, climate warming. We have a entire generation that has been living in fear of their very survival. They are not going to do business or work in an organization that is killing the planet. The regeneration economy is going to reward those who aren't just communicating sustainability, which is passé, but those organizations that are repairing the damage that's been done. That's where they'll want to work. Those are the organizations that they'll spend their money with. We've moved away from the economy that says, give me what I want, to one that says, support that I believe in. There's just so much more that I could communicate, but I know I don't have much time. Do you have some questions around the plastic bank? How else can I serve you?
David, thank you for your presentation. I mean, it's not easy. Working with startups, the one thing we always tell them is that the story is you and not your presentation. The presentation is just there as a visual aid. And being able to convey this kind of story of what you're making, the impact that you're having, in this way, it's powerful, and thank you for that.
Yeah.
A few years back, I was working on a blockchain-based tokenization project for something similar, but the only thing that was in my mind all the time is how do you make people aware of what is happening when it's a complex supply value chain, in essence, and how do you make them feel from hitting the ground that once you do this little step, then it all fits into place. How did you manage to do that with the communities you're working with?
Just for clarity, who is it? Well, first off, a man convinced against his will is of the same opinion still. I can't convince anyone of anything. It's not possible. Can I provide a transformative learning experience where they themselves can see something new? For sure. But specifically, which people were you referencing?
Refugees coming from Syria. Back then.
A collector, that, for us, we found, a virality with it. As we were operating in the Philippines during COVID, thousands and thousands of collectors when Manila shut down comprehensively, the poorest of the poor were the ones that suffered because they live on a day-to-day basis. Like if you don't make $1 today, you won't eat today. And so when they, comprehensively shut down, there was no hope. We were able to work with the Philippines government to declare ourselves and recycling an essential service. And it became viral. It became an opportunity for, we gained thousands and thousands of additional collectors because it gave an opportunity for that $1 a day to be realized, or $2 or $4 a day to be realized. It's where we created, immediacy for plastic to food programs where they didn't have the chance maybe to go out and get food because there was lockdowns, like severe lockdowns. So an opportunity to collect plastic and receive rice. And that became very powerful because neighbor would help neighbor. Because it is a love-filled ambition. Because there was an opportunity for all. That and much of our programming includes, congregation education, where we teach children, 6, 7, 8, 9-year-old children, to go home and teach their parents about environmental stewardship, about recycling, about the monetization of the materials. And it encourages the parent to bring the household material to the school. The school becomes a plastic bank location. The children then learn that much of the school tuition is paid with by stewarding the environment. They learn as well that by stewarding the environment, some of the conditions of poverty can end. Congregation in church and mosque, where through a series of programming, we encourage and engage the congregation to not just bring their offering or tithing on their day of worship, but to bring their recycling as tithing on their day of worship. The church becomes a collection location. You see, those are locations that go out and reach the communities, they reach the poor, They have love in their heart to serve. That's what we've been doing so far.
Okay, so the way I understand it, and that's admirable, but the way I perceive it, as you say now, is that you're basing the whole approach on value collateral rather than monetization collateral. So exchanging values rather than the rest of it. It's just a caveat. It's something that it's going to be used, but the value you exchange within communities and within this kind of processes, it's much more important for people. And to this end, I come back to what you said before, that it's not about goals anymore. It's more about vision for our communities. So again, thank you for your presentation, and I think that we can open up the floor now to all of our attendees and see what kind of questions may rise for all of you.
There's always something, for people in the startup community. I think that, in the enormity of what we do, nothing that we are doing is against the laws of physics. It's all possible. The only reason you might not think it so is because you yourself have not yet become the person who can envision it, create it, speak it. Having trouble finding funding, you have not yet become the person who can attract it. It's all available.
It's an abundance mindset, as you said. So yeah, I'm with you on that. So any other questions that you may have, everybody, just raise your hand or send it over to the chat section. I'm going to ask Jessica or Julie to help me out with chat because I don't have access. But meanwhile, we heard in the previous section, you weren't here, it was too early for you. We heard in the previous section that most of the research is focused on the upstream part, the part that actually eliminates at the source the kind of waste that is being produced. How would that affect business models that are now based on the waste being produced? How would they adapt in the future, in say 10, 20 years time, in order to create the same kind of value?
Well, I think waste is a choice of diction nonetheless. I think that is in part the challenge and part of what has returned us to where we are. Now, I live in a world where all material resources will be returned to, circularity into manufacturing. I think that it's that very paradigm. So I live not in a world without plastic garbage, but a world without waste, because I think that there's always going to be that material resource. I think that will always need to be returned. And, I think the paradigm here as well, one that I live in, this abundant mindset, that there's almost 10 trillion kilos of plastic on the earth. Almost all the plastic we've ever produced is still here. And let's say a very low value of $1 a kilo. We have a $10 trillion value that's in the environment, that's available in the end to be returned into circularity. It's estimated that 500 billion will end all extreme poverty. We've deposited $10 trillion of value. That's just plastic. Every other material resource, that's, I believe, where we're going. So I think there's all kinds of additional paradigms yet still available. And nothing says you're not going to be interrupted. Nothing says that the model you're experiencing today is going to be the one that exists in the future. You have to be aware that it is also business. You have to iterate as well. Look for that rival that challenges you all the time as well. So I mean, that's an hour-long conversation on its own.
Sergen, what's your experience from working in outside of Europe?
The experience is that, of course, on the one side, we heard also from Peter, that it takes a huge amount of money or funding to start processing plants, but that's not necessary at all, and that with very simple and small means, you can create business opportunities, business models, and so on and so forth. I think that's what David also talked about, or his reaction just shows at the moment. And I think that's a very big mindset of even the industry. I mean, we are working together very closely with market leaders, with huge setups and machines and so on, and they cannot believe what we show, as you mentioned, Nikolaus, that during a call in the background, we are basically producing something out of recycled plastic. That's something they cannot imagine with their world market leader technology and so on. But that's not necessary. And I think it takes, or it would need more and more people who are grasping this and are just taking small steps by small means.
Yeah, you know, I love this.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I've got so much going on in my head.
Yeah,
You know, I love the expression that the best is the enemy of the good enough. I mean, you know, you start off as, you know, you've got a business and you think that you need to spend millions of dollars. You haven't even started. You have no idea what you need to build. You have no idea who else you can partner with. It is so much more accessible than you believe.
You're right about that. And you're also right about the fact that at some point or another, you either need to pivot, adapt, or at least know your enemy quotes and see what you can do, especially if you are into, and I don't really like the expression, but into the impact business. Yeah, when your first goal is outside your processes and out there to the people you're serving, then that's what it is, stewardship. So I remember, Tanya, I will be coming to you. I think you raised your hand in just a sec. I remember my parents back in the 90s went to Sri Lanka. And there was a program that was running there. My father explained it to me. I was just finishing high school back then. And they instead of giving them money or financial support, they gave them sewing machines. So basically, they started small businesses. And this is a paradigm close to what Sorën was doing with all that. And is a paradigm relatively close to what David, you are doing with the communities. And but the thing is that this is not something. This is not a third world problem. Poverty, especially after a 12-year recession, what we have now, is in our cities. And I think Vetis is well situated to give us an insight of how these people are either marginalized and how we can help them go out of that kind of bottomless pit of frustration and hopelessness, let's say. Mm-hmm. How do you deal with that?
Is that a question for me?
That was a question for Joke. I don't know if you heard me.
I think it's really a big problem that a lot of people who are in poverty, they don't have access to the labor market. So with the programs they can do, but it's also very difficult to find adapted work that they can do, because a lot of people, they are not so skilled for having all kinds of works. So I think it's our obligation to look for work that's adapted to their capacities. And they have a lot and they can do a lot, but we just have to adapt to look for the adapted work and give it to them. And I think one of the resorting of plastics is one of the elements that can be great for them.
Okay, thank you, Joke. Tanya, I think Julie will. Right.
Yeah, I can speak. Thanks everyone for your presentations. It was really inspiring. My question is that a common complaint that I hear from companies when they talk about the circular economy is that it's actually more expensive to use secondary resources than primary resources. So if I say, if you tell companies, oh, you could, instead of using raw wood, you can use recycled wood instead to make your product, let's say. And a common complaint of the company would be, actually, it's actually more expensive for me to recycle this wood and treat it and clean it and use it to make a product. But it seems like the business of Plastic Bank and of Plasticpreneur shows that you can overcome this barrier. So I'm curious how this barrier is overcome. Is it a question of context, where it's just much cheaper for people in the developing countries to collect waste, so it's just cheaper? or how is this barrier overcome?
You know, for us, we add value. I mean, we add the value of the collector. We have a connection to where the material comes from. We have the ability for the consumer to truly understand that the material that they're buying adds value in the world. Now that's there, of course. And there's a lot to say on this. I had this beautiful opportunity of watching the head of sustainability for Pepsi, Catherine, I forget her last name, but for Pepsi speak, and someone in the audience said the same thing. And they said, yeah, but the consumer, it's going to cost more, and the consumer is not going to have to want to pay, or the consumer's not going to want to pay more. And her answer was, yeah, they shouldn't. You shouldn't have to pay more for something that doesn't kill the planet. And that's a paradigm that organizations that, in my experience, are beginning to face. They recognize that if they're going to still be in business, if they're going to be able to attract and hire best talent, they have to add a more, abundant, appropriate view of the world into their business. As I've spoken around the world, in the past, I would ask and say, well, why are you here? Why are you attending this packaging summit, whatever it would be? And they'd say, oh yeah, consumers are asking, for us to do more. But now when I ask, they say, yeah, you know what? We can't hire staff. Nobody wants to come and work at us because we package in plastic, and we're not able to hire quality people. And so they're looking at it from a different paradigm today. The necessity to compete requires them to do well in the world as well. Now, at the same time, if you can offer it better, faster, cheaper, the world will change more quickly. We're racing to provide ocean-bound material or social plastic, which is our trademark, below the cost of post-consumer material. Now, we just move our business model. Instead of influencing the cost of goods, instead of influencing the price of the plastic that they buy, if we can return it at 1 penny below other competitive products, and then work on having the marketing budget, which is the predominant budget that the product has, and take from the marketing budget to pay for our profitability. That seems to be working powerfully as well. So I don't know, lots of, I think I rambled on a little bit, but I gave a couple of nuggets, I hope.
Maybe if I add from our point of view, it's also what Nikolaos was saying, what they felt in Thessaloniki after the presentation, that with although it seems simple technology, the outcome still fulfills all certification and quality standards and so on and so forth. So it's really a matter of saving thousands or tens of thousands of euros in producing these kind of products. And the costs, which maybe are higher if you're buying recycled or using recycled plastic here in Austria, are then much compensated with the cheaper cost of production and processing and so on. And as David said, still we have manual process in the machines done by handicapped people, by unemployed people, by homeless people. So you not only save a lot of money, thousands of euros, but you also add value, not now in the collection part, because that's what we're doing, but in the processing part. And this is, again, this combination which economically makes sense, and of course, social makes sense, obviously, as well.
Right. Julie, you want to ask something?
I would like to share some thoughts that were shared on the chat for people who cannot access the chat. So it's from Relic Plastic, who said that it is more expensive and restrictive to work with second-hand materials, but part of our job is to use this platform as a mean to raise the value of plastic waste. Our material cost is cheap, but our processes to short, clean, etc. is a lot more working with virgin plastic. We can sell our product at the rate we set because we also sell the story, and buyers align with our ethics. So I think it's also mirror what said already today, but maybe also Jokke, you want to answer a little bit on that?
I hope that Jan can help me a little bit because I didn't very understand the question.
I'm here, Jokke.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay. Zo de vraag, de algemene vraag was, ja, er is een klacht van bedrijven dat de circulaire producten eigenlijk duurder zijn.
Ja.
Wat is jullie ervaring erin? Dus tweedehands producten en zo. Wat is jullie ervaring erin, hoe dat die barrière kan genomen worden? Door zijn, in het algemeen. Heeft dat met prijs te maken of zijn er andere manieren? En een paar mensen hebben al geantwoord dat een van de dingen is dat er toegevoegde waarde is door het betrekken van sociaal kwetsbaren en dat mensen daar misschien wel voor willen betalen. En nu is de vraag wat jouw kijk erop is.
Ja, ik mag in het Nederlands antwoorden. Hè? Ik denk dat de eerste stap in de circulariteit eigenlijk het gebruik is van de goederen totdat ze eigenlijk einde leven zijn. En ik denk dat we daar eigenlijk een stap missen, omdat we dikwijls al spreken over het herbruikbaarheid, zeker ook over het hergebruik van plastic. Terwijl ik zoiets heb van, er zijn veel dingen die nu eigenlijk al worden verwerkt, die eigenlijk nog kunnen gebruikt worden. Ik denk dat dat een belangrijke stap is. Want ja, onze core business is eigenlijk de verkoop van de tweedehands producten. Dus niet eigenlijk, ja, dit was eigenlijk meer een bijkomend project om te kijken van, zijn er ook mogelijkheden, vooral naar werkgelegenheid. Ik weet niet of dat ongeveer een antwoord is op de vraag.
Ja, ik zal het vertalen voor jou.
Thanks.
I will translate what Joke just told me in Dutch, in Flemish. So she says, apart from the pilot project that she described to you earlier with regard to the plastics, the core business of what they are doing is really selling second-hand products. So she wants to emphasize that it's also important that we as consumers use products until the end of their life cycle. So keep second-hand products also like into the economy. I mean products as second-hand products into the economy.
Thank you, Jan, for the translation, Joke, for your answer. I love listening to the language. I can't understand how you do it without vowels, to be honest. But yeah, thank you for your answer. So, are there any other questions from the audience? I don't want to monopolize the discussion. Julia, any questions?
Not at the moment. Not at the moment.
I can add something real quick here.
Yeah,
I
please.
do think that to answer Tanya's question, from what I saw in the most recent project and just generally what's going on with carbon taxation and such, is that it may not always show up, and maybe that's just more work for us to do, as Kiki from Relic Plastic said. But I do think that there are a lot of companies, they have to essentially sell their waste products at a negative rate, and that price is being raised, right? That price is constantly being raised by governments who see this as a problem. So and recycling is a better solution to that. So I think that even if it's not always visible, it can be visible on the operational sheets of these companies, because they're getting taxed for their carbon emissions, et cetera, and they're panicking. Some of them are panicking. They need another out. So I do think that if you make sure, if you have this kind of technology, you don't have to necessarily look at developing some end user product. If you just talk to these companies, Shinetsu I just brought up, they're very active in this because they need other channels for their products because it's becoming too expensive. So just to add a little note there, it may be the case that the ones where it's still cheap enough are not the most problematic. If our governments are doing their jobs well, you'd think that the ones that are becoming increasingly expensive, the products that are becoming increasingly expensive, are the ones that are being properly taxed. I don't know if they do. I mean, it's an open question.
That's Sergen, you want to say something? Or?
I just want to add something, because I mean, Kiki, they are working with our machines. They have a couple of them, and that's what we experience from more than 50 countries. That because we are focusing on the processing part, the collecting and washing is done manually. And as Kiki said, it's a very takes a lot of human resources basically and time. And then there's this fact that the recycling industry, the collectors on industrial scale, they are basically selling in tons. If you call them and say, hey, can I have a little bit of plastic? I don't know how David is doing it. Then usually they ask you, how many trucks do you need? And then I say, well, I need a bucket full because with 50 kgs, I can make hundreds of euros or even thousands of euros for the recoms, for instance. So we turn a little bit of plastic waste into a much higher margin and value. And that's then the challenge that we are struggling, or a lot of our customers are struggling to locally connect to the industrial the industrial collectors and washers, because they would only need the granules or the shreds to then process into new products. But they don't have either the money or the storage to store tons of plastic because they only need a little bit. So that's also, we see that plastic collecting and processing, and that's David's world, is thought on a large industrial scale. But what in our case or in our eyes is needed is a much more decentralized, local, not only collecting but also processing and product waste. And then you can also bring more the local context. Circular economy is also about local services, local solutions. If it's everything designed on large scales, then of course it's more in large hubs, in large cities and so on. And we try to basically, in Europe, most of our customers are in Europe, we have tons of experience, tons of examples where this is working, where in decentralized small cities, recycling systems are starting, production is starting. But as if Kiki is absolutely right, the collecting and the sorting, that's the labor intense part. And the industry is doing it on such a large level, and it's for them more expensive to even write a bill for this small bucket of plastic waste than just giving it to us for free. And so that's a little bit of a challenge we are facing, all of us, in this small scale settings.
It's interesting. We also have here in Thessaloniki, we have to go through the bureaucracy and MOUs and so on, but we have a couple of small businesses that are producing detergents. One of them is producing detergents, and they want to work with us in order to collect the plastic bottles from their customers. They're supposed to be environmentally friendly detergents, and they want to do the extra mile to collect plastic bottles, clean them, and then give it to us. Of course, we cannot take the whole quantity, but it's a start, about something. And then I want to go back to what Peter said. We've been working with a tier 1 automotive manufacturer for not automotive parts manufacturer, and basically what they're doing is that they don't have a clear view of how many containers they have, which are considered returnable transport items, right? And he said, when I asked him, how come is this a problem? You are a multi-billion-dollar business, right? You have what, 15,000 containers and that's it. I mean, you might lose half of them and it's just a drop on your budget, right? And he said, it's not that. It's a fact that every revenue stream and profit margin is squeezed by the industry itself. And now we're going to be taxed because Europe is changing the legislation for carbon trading and carbon taxing. I said, whoa, I mean, that's a kind of complication that at this level, at least I wasn't exposed to. I said, okay, that's an interesting thing because it opens up, even for smaller businesses, it opens up the opportunity to work with, other people and much smaller startups until they come to a point where they can be more productive and more be able to scale up. So Tanya, you have a question?
Yes, I do, but I also see that Julie has one, so maybe she can ask first because she hasn't asked a question yet.
It's not really a question, it's just to read aloud one of the comments from the chat for those who do not have access. So it's again from Kiki from Relic Plastic. She said, yes, recom comms are 70 grams each, and that then split again by all the separate colors needed to make each color. Collecting ourselves the recycled plastic rather than buying commercially recycled plastic allows us to produce products beautifully with the Plasticpreneur machines because they're small scale and hand operated. So I just wanted, I think it can close this conversation. And Tanya, please.
Okay, so my question is about scale and impact. So it was about what Sorën was saying about how, you know, kind of people who tend to use Plasticpreneur machines, they take small amounts of plastic and increase the value of this plastic a lot by making sort of boutique, handcrafted products. So my question is, wouldn't, this might sound a bit like devil's advocate, but I really struggle with this, which is, you know, what's the impact of that then? If everyone is just, if you're just taking a very small amount of plastic, you know, it's hard for me to justify, you know, what's the impact or, you know, on the planet and on sustainability.
Yeah, maybe I jump in first and then see what the others are adding. So the boutique, we have to decide or differentiate first on the products. There are not only boutique products being made, there are fence poles being made, which are not rotting in Uganda. There are household articles made in refugee camps, which are not accessible. So of course, the goal is always to identify useful products for local markets. And of course, in our case, we have small scale machines, which are cheap to have access to it, which can be shipped around easily, which are maintenance free. And we don't say that they are there to clean up the nature. To clean up the nature and the environment, you need large scale collecting systems, machinery systems, and so on. But again, with those systems, you're not employing as many people, or you're not having as many skill development opportunities as you have with this hands-on. So for instance, if we play for Yoki with Vites, it would make sense to have our setup, the small scale setup, to have people which are maybe handicapped or whatever, working with them, generating income with them. But if she is reaching a specific amount of waste she's collecting, and the number she showed us, that's quite some numbers. Of course, she needs a bigger machine set, but the bigger set costs hundreds of thousands or even millions of euros. And so that's the big difference. So we are at the very low bottom on the mass. Then there's the industry level on the very top. And of course, in the next years, there will be more middle sector technology, and it's already out there. So our focus is on the people side to generate income opportunities, and on the other side, to give products the opportunity to enter markets. And products can be spare parts, which will never enter the market because they're otherwise too expensive in the molding, in the injection process, and so on. So in the circular economy level, again, spare parts play a huge role, having products designed in a circular design context to replace items, to have it modular. It's all there. Every designer knows it, but it's at the end a matter of costs in the production, because then the industrial level, it's too expensive. So we think our impact is on the one side, of course, on the people's level, on income opportunities. On the other side, of course, on awareness, because hundreds of thousands of people have experienced recycling processes on these machines. And one of the third, and there may be even more points, is really that products, and of course they should be useful products, can enter the market to have it in a circular economy setting, or at least try to have it in a setting like that.
I think the whole conversation had a quick flow in the beginning with the presentation, so I think we've spent enough time in the round table and the discussion. So if there are no other questions from the audience, Julie, I don't know if there's a question from the chat. No other questions. So I'd like to wrap up, first of all, by saying thank you for being with us and spending your time this afternoon with us, and giving us your insight, each one from their own perspective. If I was to wrap up, I would say that, first of all, obviously plastic recycling is not a third world problem, it's not a first world problem, it's a global problem. Everybody's facing it, everybody's going to face the consequences, so everybody should put in some time and some thought on how they walk in life and how they deal with it. But there are also different levels where we can use it. There's a level of alleviating, not actually alleviating poverty, but giving some sense of dignity in the cases where dignity is a scarce commodity. There's also cases where we can facilitate the economic potential at small scale, but that's enough. I mean, if you have local communities working on that, that's fair enough. And then there's larger scale potential in, let's say, Europe or the US, where these problems are more dealt with within value chains, collecting, recycling, and so on. But there's also the potential to innovate and bring forth new solutions or new processes that might speed up the process of, making our planet, taking it to the next level, and hopefully being able to reverse the whole mess that we did over the last century or so. So again, I would like to thank everyone. I would like to thank our audience for being with us so far. And Julie, I think it's back to you for closing remarks.
Actually, it's me, but thank you, Nikos. So yeah, I can.
Jessica, yes, my bad. I will pay for it afterwards.
No worries at all, please. So yeah, I can just forward and again share the big thank you to all of our speakers from our last session this afternoon. And whoever might be able to attend tomorrow morning's session, you feel free to actually see how the startups and enterprises and makers initiatives challenge these kind of systems we're living in right now with their ideas and solutions. And tomorrow morning, we will then also be able to give these awards out to our contestants. Before closing, I would like to wrap up a bit today as most as I can. This day has been more than interesting. We have had so many different speakers from all around Europe and the globe. Thank you, David, for entering from Canada. Thank you so much on that one. So we started this morning quite early, around 10, and started to talk about on the city level, but not only on the city level, but also on the European level, understanding the social economic system we're living in. And while we're doing this, also understanding the interconnectedness in which we are part of. No? So many things we've heard is that we have to understand the city ecosystem in many different layers to tackle the plastic pollution or plastic problem as such. And understanding this ecosystem, understanding each layers of them, understanding the different actors and stakeholders also helps us to understand the roles and responsibilities of each stakeholder. May it be the municipality, may it be an SME, may it be policymakers, etc., etc. And one thing we heard, I think, more than once during the session this morning was that is many things are a two-sided coin, and that we heard in many different relationships actually. So, and that brings up again the point I was bringing earlier, is that many things are actually interconnected, which we often maybe do not see with the first sight. From going to these different layers in the ecosystem, in the afternoon we further had a dive into the topic of research and what kind of fabric we have to actually weave between research and practice. So we had many inspirational speakers from Metabolic as well as Father Barcelona and from the Ellen MacArthur Foundation who have shared their common practices in research and how these actually relate to practices of communities, from businesses, etc. And what we can do as researchers, but what we can do also as a citizen to contribute to a shift towards a more circular economy in all different ways. I think for that it was really key to understand that each actor needs a different way of communication, because we as businesses, we as researchers, we as citizens, we communicate in different ways, but what holds us all together is the common value or the common idea we have, and that idea is towards the circular economy. So that was, I think, one of the very interesting takeaways from this afternoon session. And then lastly, I think we went into a very philosophical and very practical in the same time session this evening. Very inspirational talks we had again from Plasticpreneur, from Plastic Bank, Benedict Peax and Vitas this afternoon. So thank you also for that. You're still here. And we heard a lot about identifying the opportunities, because there are opportunities obviously there. We heard about them in many different ways. So as funding opportunities, as opportunities existing to work with people further from the labor market, etc. So there are opportunities, especially social opportunities, which we just have to identify and strategically understand how we can focus our work towards this, and what actually needs to be more created, or what is actually more the awareness of these existing systems that are in place. I mean, there's many more things to say, and I have many more thoughts probably, and I was trying to make it short, but I think barely was able to bring everything together what we've learned today. So bear with me on this one, please. I'm still trying to myself digest everything from today. But hopefully tomorrow morning when we all come together, we can have a fresh mind and talk about this also more in detail with our contestants. So from this side, I would just like to thank again Unesta and Reflow, all our partners, also from Benedict Peax, that have made it possible to have today's challenge. We're really happy that we were able to host this session with these amazing speakers from all over the world. And Julie, maybe you can share again also our social media channels and the chat for everyone to keep updated with anything. And I think for this, if no one wants to share anything more, I would say we see each other tomorrow.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you so much. Bye.